Natural Gas Summit. Tell me about your natural gas vehicle.
I have a 2009 Honda Civic GX. It's dedicated to run on purely natural gas. It holds the equivalent of about 8.5 gallons, if you will. They call it gasoline gallon, but it's equivalents. It gets roughly the same mileage as a regular Honda Civic, roughly the same performance. The only real drawback is that the gas doesn't hold, or the tank doesn't hold quite as much energy as, say, the gasoline tank would have in a comparable Honda.
How many miles you get on a full tank?
I have actually gotten about a little over 300 before. Just like any other car, if you drive a little slower and long trips, you'll get better mileage. And on a long trip, I went from downtown Columbus to downtown Cleveland. From there down I-77 over through Coshocton down to Newark, which is where I refilled with natural gas, and I think I'd gone 303 miles.
What's the cost of natural gas right now for your car?
Typical fueling locations here in Central Ohio, I usually pay about $1.79 to about $2.
Okay,
per gallon equivalent.
And tell me, per gallon equivalent, how many miles are you getting per gallon?
About the same. It would be probably in the high 30s, low 40s, depending how you drive.
Is there any difference? Do you feel any difference when you're driving it?
No, it's pretty much like a regular Honda Civic. They're plenty fast enough. The car will, from what I've been told, will exceed the speed limit on the highway system. But yeah, it's kind of under-impressive. There's really not much difference. It's very quiet. It burns very clean. In fact, the car's got about 18,000 miles on it, and the inside of the tailpipe still looks brand new.
Really? Because
there's hardly any, particulate matter, soot, if you will, or unlike what you'd see in a gasoline or especially a diesel tailpipe.
Did this come ready to drive from Honda, or did you have to have something done to it?
It's factory made. So yeah, in fact, they've talked about it at the event today that some of the valves are hardened. It's from the factory.
Okay. And what drawbacks are there?
The only drawback is that there aren't that many fueling locations. The price at the existing fuel locations is great. $2 or less a gallon equivalent. I don't have natural gas at my house, but if I did, it basically works this way. 1 MCF of natural gas is about the equivalent of 8 gallons of gasoline. Well, if you're a Columbia Gas or a Dominion customer, 1 MCF only costs you about $5. 8 gallons of gasoline for $5. Now, if you had a home compressor fueling station, obviously there'd be some electricity costs involved in compressing it in there. So you'd have to add that in, and of course, the car costs a little bit more up front. The compressor in your garage costs a few $1,000s. It's really, though, primarily it's better for fleet customers that are high use. If you were driving your car a lot of miles, driving it all day, whether it was like a taxi cab or a delivery service, that's where those things really are geared towards, because the fuel cost is so low.
You were a state lawmaker one time. Is this something the state ought to be doing with its fleet?
Well, it would depend. It's difficult to say. The state fleet is vast. You have universities, you have state vehicles, you have the highway patrol. For certain parts of the state fleet that are, if the vehicles are in use constantly all day long, like a trash truck is, for example, well, that's where and something like that is where it makes a little more sense. If the vehicle's only used, a couple hours a day, probably not. It's difficult to make a blanket statement like that. But right now, for any type of fleet vehicle that is in use all day long, that's when you typically see that the economics are there.
Okay.